I actually started off by getting an education in like material science, physics, and business. So when I went to Penn, there's like this dual degree program where you could do both. And there's always been like two things that have fascinated me to no end. One is just like, how does the world work? Which for me, that manifested as like physics. And then the second one was, how do you bring large impact to the world? Which to me, the answer was always business. And so I've always been like torn between these two things. And so it just turns out that I graduated into the last recession. So in like the 0809 period. And so the idea of going into business at that time, while sentiment was so negative, like people's ways of operating in business at that time was really quite different because of the sentiment and because of the downturn. And so I was like, great, this actually makes it easier for me to decide to just go into academia and really like quench my thirst for essentially knowledge, right? And so that's what like drove me into the PhD. But even when I was doing my PhD, I actually started two businesses. And so that side of me never left. And then like one thing led to another. I ended up working at an ad tech company and building new businesses inside of that ad tech company. And so that's sort of how the two sides have always played with each other. Is I've always had this strong desire to understand how the world works. And then I've always been trying to build something that I can scale out to bring to the rest of the world. And so even today, I would say that my way of business building is like very much like a scientist. So it is highly experimentally driven and really trying to ask what are the right experiments to deploy into the market in order to get the signals back of what works, what adds value, and why. And so like that's how the two sides have always like lived together throughout my journey.
And it's not like the scientific method is a beautiful tool to figure anything out. And I think sometimes I know a lot of scientists, it's like the more you learn, the more you kind of get like pigeonholed in a way of thinking. And so I think probably like half the battle is just kind of like realizing that the tools, like the thought process that you developed and getting a PhD and learn these mechanisms can be applied in these other ways. And so it's cool that you're building businesses along the way. So like your brain couldn't like get stratified and make that a harder transition. I don't know to the extent that that was difficult, but I have noted in a lot of scientists, friends of mine, where it's like the PhD is almost like a shackle that they need to like kind of throw off and start seeing how like applicable that really deep ability to teach yourself something and then be an expert on it and then apply it in so many different ways. That's a really good, an asset that you really don't see a lot of PhD smart people in that regard. There's a lot of different types of smart people, of course, being founders. They're usually like a CTO or like one of the first hires.
Yeah, I think that actually, and I'm curious what your view on this is, but my belief is that I think that it's actually like one of the things that most PhD programs get wrong, which is they don't actually teach candidates how to take advantage of the skills that they're building as a PhD to do jobs other than becoming a professor. Because actually the very best PhDs that I knew ended up becoming people who would have been excellent business leaders or founders themselves, because at the end of the day, the thing that makes you really successful as a researcher is actually your ability to communicate the ideas that you're working on. Yes, you need to be able to work on the ideas. It's sort of like back wheel, front wheel of a bicycle, where like the back wheel of the bicycle is, yes, you have to be able to produce good research, but it doesn't get you anywhere without the front wheel, which is how do you communicate what you're working on, right? And so that skill set, I think, is extremely applicable to the founder skill set. And yeah, I think most of the successful, even researchers that I know, are very good at that. So
No, I agree. I see it from more like the evidence of it. I haven't been in a PhD program, but I see the people who come out of it. I see where they go and kind of the stress that they have as they move through those, um, periods of ignorance. I guess like it's a very like, especially if you haven't been kind of pushed to try to break those boxes and those molds, and you're being put into a new environment. Like, what are you going to do? and who's your advisors as well, which is kind of interesting. Like if you all your advisors are academics, like even if they could be really well meaning and helping you want to do whatever you want to do,
Yeah.
but their bend is kind of going to be towards their skill set because that's what they're best able to be like, hey, this is how I would do stuff. And so they're kind of skewing you without even trying to skew you. And so I don't know to the extent PhDs have like what business schools have, where you have like competitions and stuff. But I think it'd be really interesting to have like a panel of advisors that are more like have more breadth to them, and it's not just academics. It could have like industrial people and then startup people, and so you can have like Q&As with these individuals to kind of counteract that over slant towards academia, just based on the fact that you're talking to people that their entire lives is academia. This is an entirely different way of survival, as far as I can tell. And as well as even building a company, if you use the academic model of a research lab and you transplant it into a startup, that does not go well. Like the startup is much faster, and they have like different ways of doing things, and that's usually been a fun thing because I'm an advisor for a number of startups, and like building the engine is usually the thing that they don't even realize that is something they need to do in terms of like the people element as well. So there's a lot of things that like the skills are there, but it's not like a well-rounded skill to make use of it, like you're saying.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where you need to know how to adapt it to the different incentives that a business has versus an academic lab has, right? And so you want to like not try to copy the way of working in academia and business, but you want to like take inspiration instead. Yeah. And I think that if you were to take that approach and then say, actually, yes, but in this context, I need to optimize for this other set of outcomes. I think that, yeah, it can lead to like very good outcomes, right? Like Google, right? It started by 2 ex-PhDs, and they actually took a lot of inspiration from how their labs worked in order to design how the organization would work.
Another, I think, advantage of people with PhDs is they tend to be a bit more humble. Like if I ask a PhD a question, they'll say, I don't know. Or they'll like, the answer will be like very math based, I guess. Where like, if you talk to someone who's just, let's say just in the startup thing, they might try to BS you a little bit. They might not even realize they're doing it. But it's like, I have to like sit there and think, to what extent does this person know what they're talking about? and then how much is this is just like they're kind of guessing, which is fine. It's the same thing. But like if you have the knowledge of like, oh, I don't know, give me like 5 minutes, I'll go look it up and come back to you. Like that's a more interesting conversation because like I trust that they did something, then we can have a conversation about it. So the humbleness of kind of checking your math is something I think is probably really strong. I don't know, in your experience with the many different types of people you come into, if that's another asset that comes in, like the humble, well, it's also a double-edged sword, right? Like when you're trying to raise money or whatever, if you're too humble, then it probably doesn't go too far. But if you're too, arrogant, then you end up like Elizabeth Holmes, and that's not good either. So,
I mean, but she was good at fundraising. So
yeah, that was like her own. Well, yeah, I don't think life's gonna end well. So, like,
I'm not saying that it was a good. I'm not saying that what she did was good. I'm just saying that there's something to be said about the fact that she raised funding. Now she didn't raise funding from traditional VCs. So I mean, anyway, I don't want to even sound like I'm in any way, shape, or form defending what she did.
No. You're appreciating the skills.
Not, so.
You're appreciating the skills.
Yeah.